the emergency cord is pulled and people with the practitioners with the relationship perspective of an organization are pulled in to help. I'll also have the most robust and complete data set that's been done created in the UK in the last 20, 30 years. Argument is viewed very quickly as polarization and something that's dangerous. Actually, it should be encouraged. Synthetic audience is useful to create shortcuts, but ultimately junk. We're not going to convince anyone of an argument by sharing an Excel spreadsheet. That's the absolute worst of practice.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Stephen Waddington, one of the most original and rigorous thinkers and practitioners in public relations in the UK over the past 30 years. Having cut his teeth in the 1990s with Broder and Weber Shandwick, for most of the 20-tweens and 20-teens, Stephen ran several different agencies, including Rainier, Speed and Ketchum. Since then, he's gone much more plural, splitting his time between non-executive director roles, education and professional development, both for himself, but also for the industry more broadly. Indeed, I'd say there are three distinctive drumbeats to Stephen's career, which who sometimes describes himself as a reformed PR man, would argue truly set him apart. First, he's committed to improving standards and ensuring growth and learning for those who work in the industry. This is evidenced by his commitment to and work with professional bodies, from the Chartered Institute of Public Relations to the University of Newcastle, where he was visiting professor in PR, the latter for a decade from 2014. Second, he's very much of a data-driven, evidence-based kind of guy. The Pints Profits case study he presented at the May 2025 Datacomms conference on behalf of his client Brew, a digital marketing agency servicing the hospitality sector, was of a quality and level of data-driven rigor rarely seen, I would say, outside a listed or multinational business. But it was also a masterclass in data storytelling. Not so common a trope, perhaps, in PR, but written through his professional advisory firm, Wadds Inc, like a stick of rock. And third, I would say he has the always move forward curiosity of a shark, keen to learn and understand more and more. He's currently in the throes of his research doctorate at Leeds Beckett University, the topic of which we will most definitely come back to. It's great to have you with us, Stephen. Welcome to Data Malarkey.
Thank you very much, Sam. And I have to say, I'm going to record this afterwards and get a summary of that spiel, because it's quite the finest introduction I think I've ever had. Thank you.
Well, you're very kind. Listen, I would call myself a reformed PR man. Can you? I take it that you feel it's a good narrative of how you got to where you are today. Is there anything that I've missed out? Anything I've got wrong? It's your chance to put the record straight.
No, absolutely spot on. I think that rigor you described comes from my first degree, which was in engineering, and we can maybe come on and talk to that. And I think I bring an engineering perspective to my work. I was thinking about this, in preparation for this discussion, but I think that's sort of the nugget of the rock that runs through everything that I do.
Very, very interesting. We will definitely come back to that. And the engineering perspective, I think, is such an interesting and vital one. But before we get down and dirty with data, I want to start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you, you. And it doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about the day job. Could you tell me, Stephen, how do you spend your time?
What a lovely question. So I live up in the northeast of England, in Newcastle. Newcastle's a wonderful city in that it is situated, or we are situated, on a river, close to the sea. But then we can very easily get up to Northumberland, one of the most beautiful parts of the UK, and generally undiscovered parts of the UK. So I tend to spend most of my time in and around Newcastle, although I also have a houseboat on the River Thames in London. So that's the office and home when I'm working in London, and generally I go back and forth between the two and between the spaces I've described. So the countryside up in Northumberland, the coast and beach in Newcastle and the city.
The sea, the river, and the Thames. Maybe I wasn't so wrong about this, swimming forward like a shark after all. I'm a data-driven, academically curious fellow myself, and I'm always really interested to find those qualities in someone else. Your mentioning of engineering is really, really interesting, and I think you'd agree with me that it's fair to say that data-driven academic rigor is not necessarily something that's found in abundance in the PR industry. I've just been reading a new book on marketing effectiveness by a guy called Soren Petilanet, who's a former guest on this podcast. Indeed, he was the head of marketing effectiveness at Mars. He's now at Pepsi, and he trained as a telecoms engineer in 1990s Romania, and he brings that rigor. Tell us the data and academic part. They ring your bell because of that engineering background?
I've been thinking about this recently, and trying to retrofit where this comes from, because you're right. There is you're right. There is, through my work, this drive for both self-improvement, but to improve the industry, and to do that through data. I think an engineering background gives you a respect for repeatable scientific process, and those are sorely lacking within the majority of corporate communication and public relations practice. But it also gives you a respect for knowledge, and knowledge that has been laid down before through the generations. And certainly we lack the academic community in public relations, corporate communications, and practice they are completely different communities. The people look different. They move in different places. They read different things. They don't occupy the same spaces, which is, it's a huge shortfall in practice. And I haven't experienced it as being extreme in any other areas, although undoubtedly, it may be. I think, we lack the rigor for all these reasons when we compare ourselves with law, with medicine, with engineering. Indeed, in engineering, I did an electronic engineering degree, and you're taught the absolute respect for repeatability and proof, and validation ultimately through science. And if you don't respect those things, the outcomes are absolutely catastrophic. Now, in public relations, we're arguably dealing with a sphere that's of equal importance, to engineering. We're dealing with the public sphere, we're dealing with conversation, we're dealing with issues of reputation and trust, yet we don't have this respect for knowledge in the same way. And I'm not sure why, because, data and academic standards provide credibility, they provide structure, they provide a foundation and a way of building on knowledge, and ultimately proof of value.
Very good, very good. No, I agree. It is perplexing, but there are voices. I mean, we've recently welcomed, I know you know him well, Daryl Sperry from Hard Numbers, the podcast. There are voices. I do sense that things are. I'm not active in the industry, but I think sense that things are changing in certain corners, and that it'll be a process of evolution. That those that take data and evidence and, as you say, repeatable scientific processes more seriously are going to be those who will thrive and survive. But let's turn, if we could, to your current. I don't know if it's a
obsession,
if it's a passion, or a bugbear.
Obsession.
Absolutely. Research. Can you tell us about the subject matter, your approach, and the point you're at time of recording?
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, this isn't going to date because I've got at least another 2 years to go. The PhD process, as you know, is as for a part-time student is at least 6 years. So I spotted that moment during the pandemic when within every organization, the corporate communication or public relations function was elevated. I did 2 pieces of work particularly. One with the NHS, where comms directors were in goal command, in daily stand-ups with the CEO, helping deal with, the public health emergency, and then issues related to vaccination and hesitancy. And then I did a study for the government looking at the resiliency of public companies and the function, the support of the comms function, which helped manage that change where we went from working in offices to working remotely, and huge changes to supply chain and so forth. And in every organization there, the comms function, was also front and center within management. And I thought, Sam, I cracked it. 120 years, public relations has been striving to prove its value and its position as a function within management. And so I set about. I've known the team at Leeds Business School for quite some time. I've written a couple of books with Ralph Tench, the Dean of Research up there. And so I set about writing this proposal based on the observation and suggesting that I would look for empirical evidence to build base of knowledge to prove this. And so I'm now 3 years in. I've reviewed 120 years worth of literature, both from a public relations and management domain. There's two pieces and the really upsetting thing personally is all the knowledge exists. We understand the conditions that enable the function to be elevated. There's even, I found a piece of work just done about 10 years ago by a woman called Shannon Bowen in the States, which looked at this exact condition of a crisis event, creating the opportunity where the emergency cord is pulled and people with the practitioners with a relationship perspective of an organization are pulled in to help the organization. So I've ended up building on that work and two other pieces of work, and the study grandly called the Excellence Study that was done in the 80s, the first study of corporate communications and public relations and the impact on management. And then this longitudinal piece of work study, European Communications Monitor, that's been done since 2007. Building on both of those pieces of work, I've created a series of hypotheses, and now I'm out trying to, asking practitioners, inviting practitioners to join me in helping to test those, hopefully to build a knowledge base or, sufficient data to build knowledge and to contribute to this gap that clearly exists in our practice.
So you're keen to get contributions from comms and PR practitioners in the kind of the field research stage. Mm. Can you describe what you're looking for and how volunteers can get involved? I mean, obviously, we'll include links and so on in the show notes.
Yeah, so I've set up this series of hypotheses. One of the things you really struggle with as maybe know yourself as a PhD researcher is the realization that you are going to solve and build on a tiny bit of knowledge, an increment. You set out with this grand notion, and I did. I'm going to solve the value of public relations, and then away we go. Actually, I'm going to add a tiny bit of knowledge to that exists already. But I think actually my contribution there will be greater than that, because having come from practice, I've spotted this gap between theory and practice, but I've also got deep respect for what's come before, and I can hopefully help elevate that. So I've set up these hypotheses. I've tested this. I've put this survey out into the field of practice to test this. And now I'm busy trying to recruit practitioners to respond to it. I mean, it's a serious piece of work in itself. There's 70 odd data points across, if you complete it in full, and I'm trying to aim for 1,000 completions, so 1,000 people to complete it, because if I do, not only will I tackle the issues that I'm setting out and the research question that I'm setting out, but I'll also have the most robust and complete data set that has, been done created in the UK in the last 20, 30 years.
Very good. Well, as I say, we'll definitely include links to that, and I promise I myself will also, even if I use the word reformed, I'll also kind of contribute to that. My own research was rather more prosaic. I was an experimental psychologist, and I was looking at why do we drink and continue to drink to binge levels, even though we're aware there are negative consequences. It was great fun paying students money to get them drunk or not, but that is another story. And of course, if you get to this your 1,000 goal, I mean, even go shy of that, you're clearly going to have data to play with for years to come, well beyond your doctoral research. I want to pick at it a bit more, and you may say I don't know the answer to this, but why do you think that those in the public relations communications industry for so long have fought relatively shy of data and evidence and data-driven insights? Or do you think I'm mischaracterizing the industry by saying?
No, I don't think you are at all. I think it starts foundationally with this lack of knowledge and lack of respect for formal learning. So in any other profession, in any other professional sphere, and this is part of the gap with management, in any other professional sphere, there is a very, very clear route into practice, and then there is a very clear expectation of how you maintain your professional standing. You think about legal, you think about finance, engineering. I've talked about already. There just isn't that in public relations. And you mentioned Darryl Sperry. Darryl, hard numbers and practitioners of his ilk are unusual in doing the work to support their practice, and I have a huge respect for that. In the absence of that, we rely on anecdote and we rely on storytelling, and we have this fear of critical thinking. Really, really notice it. One of the skills you're taught as an academic is critical thinking. And it's really, really important. And I think we're working, and this is amplified by the media environment in which we work, where argument is viewed very quickly as polarization and something that's dangerous. Actually, it should be encouraged. So I think that's the main thing. The second thing is practice is so fragmented, and so data is seen as a specialism. I mean, I've got this chapter in my dissertation where I look at the history of job titles and competencies and skills and standards, and it is completely fragmented. The knowledge exists within science. But it hasn't translated into practice. So you get, there's at least 25 pseudonyms to describe what we do. There's lack of consistent competencies. There's lack of measurement frameworks. There's a real resistance to adopting the knowledge that exists there. And, I scratch my head and I really don't understand it.
Yeah, you mentioning that sort of reliance on anecdote and the fundamental belief in some PR and comms people that the plural of anecdote is data. I'm not certain that that's true.
No, but it's a good story, and that's the thing. We rely on stories, right?
And listen. I've got this bizarre. To me, it makes sense from here. This bizarre approach to become a classicist and studied that because that's what I could do, and I couldn't do the other stuff. And then going back to school and becoming a psychologist, and suddenly being faced with data and thinking, actually, these two things, they're pretty good because they're useful, and you put them together, and you can appeal to the rational side that makes it or that justifies the decisions, and the emotional sides that makes the decisions, and yet. It often feels to comms people that I'm kind of talking a completely alien language, but I have very high hopes, and I can't wait to hear what you do and read what you do discover from this. I mentioned the your Pints and Profits report for the hospitality sector industry agency Brew. If you're at liberty to, could you just give us you talked about it on a public stage, so I imagine it's not it's in the public domain, but could you give us a bit of a snapshot of that report and the need it addressed, and then how it's been used to impact the work of the client?
Yeah, so this is a really good example of a professional services company, Brew, who are expert in digital marketing. They specialize in the hospitality sector, predominantly the pub and bar trade. Building a knowledge base, building a data set to use as a foundation for consulting. Anyone that works in professional services, that's the route to ultimately building professional expertise, but also creating a moat around the work that you do. And, it's something that I do, or we do with a number of our different clients. The benefit of having a PhD and research background is that you see the value of gathering multiple sets of data. So, traditionally, data gathering within marketing, digital marketing is, let's stick a survey out. Actually, there's any number of ways of gathering data, and I'll come on to talk about that maybe. But, this organization, Brew, digital marketing agency based in Birmingham, was looking to figure out how it could build its own profile, have deeper conversations with its clients, and build its business. And so we suggested to them, right, what you want to do is characterize the nature of your business, the role of your customers within that business, and your contribution through digital marketing. So, we did that, and it's an underserved market. And I absolutely believe, there's an opportunity to build a data set around any market and create unique value. And we did in this case. The pub and trade industry, depends how you measure it. Actually, it's really underserved by government, in the government, doesn't have hospitality or culture as part of its industrial strategy, which, I think it probably should do. It contributes 26 billion to the UK economy. It's 900,000 jobs, creates an awful lot of joy. Let's face it, but it's operating at razor thin margins, and the national media and social media tell the story of pub closures week in, week out, right at the heart of the community and the fabric of UK life. So we set out to tell that story and the role of this agency, Brew, in helping to support the pub and bar trade. And we did that we did a consumer survey. How are post-COVID, how have consumers changed their behavior in visiting the pub. We did it through, so that was the first data set. The second, consumer sampling. Second data set, which, traditionally you might do. Second data set was we went and talked to, qualitative interviews. We went to talk to people who run pubs, run trade associations serving the industry, to understand, the multiple pressures that they were facing in the business. And, the industry had COVID, but then, it has had the shock of the cost of living. There's a whole load of price rises in, raw goods. Price of a pint of beer has gone up, 25% in the last 4 years. And energy and costs in recycling and so forth. So we built that data set, lot of richness there. And a consumer survey or a survey will give you a particular, one-dimensional perspective. If you actually go out and have conversations, those conversations can also then become the basis of, ongoing relationships and ongoing, discussion. So that was the second bit. And then the third bit was we actually looked at, digital marketing agency has lots and lots of data, through how, looking at the analytics of how people access websites, where they go when they're on a website, and similarly through different forms of social media and apps. So we gathered that. By the end of it, put it all together, huge data set that, we were able to tell a really interesting story. And actually, we continue to continue to. So we did that piece of work in 2024. We're actually, going through the process of retooling to do it again for 2026. So we've got a snapshot of time. But yeah, incredibly rich study.
You really sent a shiver down my spine when you said stick a survey out, and thank you for answering the kind of ways of gathering data with your consumer research, your in-depth interviews, your digital analytics, and then the really kind of impressive piece of actually triangulating that data and seeing. No, the shiver you sent down my spine was in the early 1990s. I was working in an agency on behalf of the Portman Group, the conscience of the booze industry. And the director, the head of it, was a former, no longer around, headmaster of Westminster School, Dr. John Ray. And he said to me one morning, Sam, I feel that the liquid lunch is dying. Could you get some information? Could you get some data? I don't think he said data. Could you get some evidence for that? And so we were based in the West End, and I went around and spoke to a few bar owners, maybe two or three, and a publican and a restaurant owner, and asked them a set of loaded questions, and came back and made probably 5 or 6 nationals. I mean, it was
Brilliant.
Got on Radio 1 Newsbeat, with the death of the liquid lunch. So that it wasn't totally made up, but a recent guest on this podcast, Kelly Beaver, who runs Ipsos UK and Ireland, was talking about the Market Research Society's recently launched campaign for better data, and she was talking particularly about synthetic data. So, we can create synthetic personae using AI. We can then ask those synthetic personae questions, and then we can get a whole data set. And she coined a phrase which I rather love, which was ultra processed data, kind of echoing the ultra processed food. The work you describe with Brew in that report, and the previous report, and the new one coming, is kind of clearly real data. Do you? I don't want to open a complete AI can of worms, but do you see, from your perspective in the PR industry, do you see a sort of a clarion call to sort of this synthetic, artificial, ultra-processed AI-driven data as being a kind of, there's a shortcut we can take? Are you seeing evidence of that in the industry?
So any improvement in data literacy has got to be a good thing, right? So let's take that as a start point. It's really interesting that we're having this conversation at this point in time, actually, because I've been looking at the impact of AI within education. And one thing that frustrates the hell out of me is when you put years of your life into a piece of work, a research paper, a research report, and it's published, and then there's this trend at the moment, and I really abhor it, where people will summarize it and post it on LinkedIn. That's, like synthetic audiences. Synthetic audience is useful to create shortcuts, but ultimately junk. That form of using the abstractive features of AI, useful as hacks, but ultimately it's you're not going to learn. It's a junk form of learning. It's low calorie learning, because none of that is going to go in. Much more interesting if you read a research paper, read a paper, extract what you think of the arguments for, and then have a conversation with AI about whether you've got that right or not, because it will actually go in. So AI literacy and data literacy is a good thing generally, but this junk, these junk forms of learning, I really struggle with.
No, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. And it's interesting to see. I mean, my son's just graduated, rising 22. Interesting to have conversations with him and his peers about to sort of think about entering the workforce, and quite not I wouldn't say not remotely Luddite, but having spent 3 years developing critical faculty and interrogating, actually not thinking this is going to be a shortcut to doing things more straightforwardly, but actually that it poses some real threats. I want to talk about cheeseburgers.
Just do it.
I think the McDonald's cheeseburger is important to you. Maybe not just as a nutrition source, but tell us about how you think the PR industry could benefit from McDonaldization.
McDonald's is one of the most studied organizations in business schools. Countless papers have been written on it, everything from aspects of its organizational structure to its business model to systemization of the techniques. And I actually studied the repeatability of it, and I gave a presentation at Leeds Business School. We have a conference at the start of every year where people go and share their results, but and they were looking for interesting anecdotes. So I did this presentation on the McDonald's cheeseburger, and I set it up through data collection by going to a McDonald's in Newcastle, one in two in London, and going through the experience of buying a cheeseburger, and of course it was the same price, it looked the same, tasted the same, and there's absolute consistency, which is part of the McDonald's industrialization process. And I just tell the story of that that consistency and repeatability enables them to deliver the product at an affordable price point. We like that rigor in public relations. It's the same with the engineering metaphor at the top of the discussion. We do not have respect for that repeatability, for that rigor. And ultimately, it's one of the reasons our credibility suffers.
I hear you. I absolutely hear you, and I very much enjoy the pictures of the munched out cheeseburgers that feature in the presentation.
It worked really well. It worked really well. But again, we had a really good discussion because one of the points I made was in the science of corporate communications and public relations, there is a complete over-reliance on the use of survey instruments as data gathering, and that leads to issue. I mean, it's a beautiful allegory about about the need for critical thinking and critical approaches. Which is one of the things that's certainly come through this process.
Now, in your experience and opinion, you've talked about the Brew report, but in your experience and opinion, what's the best way for comms practitioners and others to combine narrative and numbers and stories and statistics for optimal impact in communications?
So I think numbers and data give you credibility. They give you a foundation for a story. But then the story brings those numbers to life to and engages people at a very human level. Let's not think, we're not going to convince anyone of an argument by sharing an Excel spreadsheet. But if we tell a story about that spreadsheet, then maybe we will. And the Pints Profits, the example. There's some very hard data in there that tells the story of, pub closures in the UK and what that means for the fabric of society. The pub is one of the last community hubs, often within a village. The post offices are gone. And so, when you lose that, what's left within the community? COVID, we had data on infection rates, and famously that crisis was told through charts on national television, but actually it was the frontline stories of the impact on hospitals that really broke it through. So I think you need balance. You absolutely need data as the foundation of a story. But then a story is how you capture and create emotional resonance and ultimately change.
I'm completely with you. I still use the notorious SPY-M Halloween 2020 justification for second lockdown as a case study in appalling data storytelling with its 95% confidence intervals and also another guest who I think had a brilliant pandemic. If anyone can be said to have a brilliant pandemic, another guest, I'll include a link to that. David Spiegelhalter, I think he had an extraordinary impact in terms of clear communication about what this meant. And you're absolutely right that the real human stories are what enable us to. It's not sugaring the pill, but what enable us to actually sometimes maybe smuggle through. I think of it like I remember my wife putting lentils into veggie bolognese as a means of getting pulses in. I think that narrative structure, allowing to get a bit of protein into something. Now, listen. What's the worst misuse of data that you've witnessed during your career?
So we've had this discussion before. Public relations often starts with a story and then says, okay, what data do we need to back up that story? We've had this conversation, hypothesis proving versus hypothesis testing. And, if you've been in practice as long as I have, you will have sat in brainstorms where, people come up with a grand idea and then go, right, okay, what consumer research do we need to back that up? And that happens and still happens. And it's, that's the absolute worst of practice. So, then you get cherry picking metrics to justify a narrative that's already been developed rather than, basing the narrative on data. So that absolute pet hate. And the second big issue relating to my own research and the value of public relations is the over-reliance on or the lack of integrity of metrics in terms of measurement of outcomes. So we have an obsession with proxies for value, and we've even created our own, advertising value equivalent. And then that's moved on to likes and impressions, none of which has any actual root or basis in actual business outcomes. And then practice is obsessed with these things. Do the work and understand what the impact of what you're doing has on organizational outcomes. And measurement lies somewhere in that. Data collection, then measurement.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at the inability of some to know the difference between activity and impact. And I agree. Advertising value equivalency should have been dead long ago, but I know it still lingers.
Also, Sam, the point you've made to me about data used for hypothesis testing versus hypothesis proving, I've quoted you often on that.
I'm glad to hear it. My stats teachers from Sussex will be absolutely delighted. They're probably just 4 miles down the road. Perfect. Listen, Stephen, thank you so much. Can you, for our listeners and our viewers, can you tell us where they can find about you and your work online in social media and so on?
Yeah, so I've been blogging for 20 years or more, and I use blogging as a means to working out loud, thinking out loud, and as the basis of creating proposals initially for books. All my books have come out of blogs, so you can find my blog at wadds.co.uk/blog. I'm also on Substack, wadds.substack.com, and LinkedIn, of course. So any of those places.
Perfect. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today, Stephen. If only there were more people with your approach, your engineering-based approach and rigor with data, there would be rather less malarkey in the world of public relations and rather more data-driven common sense. Stephen Waddington, Wadds Inc, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam.